This is History Myths and Myth Conceptions. And today's myth conception is Herodotus, the father of history. Everybody heard that Herodotus is usually called the father of history. That's the epithet given to him by Cicero. But most of the time, people don't question the validity of this epithet. Yes, it sounds nice and poetic. And yes, it is pretty obvious that the long-lasting impact of Herodotus is huge. But upon closer examination, you will quickly see that Cicero is exaggerating things a bit. Also, almost everybody heard that sometimes Herodotus is also called the father of lies. That's the epithet given to him by Plutarch. This is also an exaggeration. In fact, we can't be 100% sure that this is what Plutarch said. Or if he did, we can't be sure that's what he meant. The work of Herodotus, the Histories, or more correctly, the Inquiries, that's the original meaning of the word, is the earliest systematic work of its kind. Resources like Wikipedia like to add stuff like the earliest in the Western literature, or in the Western culture, whatever it means. This is an interesting attempt to avoid Eurocentrism. But this kind of phrasing implies that there are some other earlier historical books somewhere, which is simply not true. Although we all understand that the Chinese can invent some 5,000-year-old monumental tome with pictures and blueprints of jet airplanes. So indeed, Herodotus kind of invented the whole genre, although he probably wasn't the first historian. But it depends on your definition of the word historian. There were other Greek writers traditionally called the logographers, which includes figures like Hecates of Miletus or Charon of Lampsacus. Only fragments of their works survive, and it is more or less safe to say that none of them was on the same level as Herodotus. Although theoretically you can argue that Charon of Lampsacus, as far as we know, wrote something about Greek-Persian affairs, and you may come to a conclusion that Herodotus was actually standing on his shoulders while writing his account, which is mostly about the Greek-Persian wars, but not exclusively. For example, Herodotus occasionally ventures into a full-blown ethnography. And yes, you can easily call Herodotus the father of ethnography if you really want to. Did you know that the semen of Indians is not white but black? Well, now you know. Herodotus also gives some interesting, invaluable even, information on Egypt. This information is sometimes dismissed as extremely unreliable, but in a way, it is the best we have from this period. I mean, the number of ancient books on the history of Egypt is 0. This is something that many people are completely unaware of. Egyptian history is reconstructed through other means, like inscriptions, for example. So the account of Herodotus is simply unique, even if it's flawed. And it is flawed. There are many flaws in the information we get from Herodotus and his approach towards historical knowledge. And this is when this "the father of lies" epithet comes to mind. The epithet of either Plutarch or somebody masquerading as Plutarch, since the authenticity of the work on the malice of Herodotus is disputed. We don't know if Herodotus is right about the semen of Indians, because Indians are famously withholding this kind of information. Someday we will find out. But we know that there are quite a lot of inaccuracies in his texts, although not as many as people previously believed. And the whole methodology seems to be, let's put it this way, more rooted in fiction than in non-fiction. This is not exactly how people today imagine serious historical works and serious historical analysis. That said, compared to pretty much any medieval chronicle, Herodotus is a shining beacon of veracity and scientific approach. But then again, there are some fantasy books about elves and dwarfs which are more reliable than medieval texts. Herodotus deserves all the praise and all the admiration, but mechanical repetition of this formula about the father of history kind of obscures both the background of his work and the actual person who deserves to be labeled as the father of history more than Herodotus. Cicero should have nominated the other guy. He couldn't imagine that people will be reading him thousands of years after his death and use quotes from his works every now and then. Cicero just liked to insert something poetic in his works. He once called Plato our god Plato. It is not wrong to call Plato a god. It is actually pretty accurate. But, it is Cicero being poetic, Cicero being nice. Herodotus is more like the grandfather of history, because the actual father of history and probably the most influential historian of all time is Thucydides, who published his History of the Peloponnesian War something like 25-30 years after Herodotus. And that's how he created a method and a blueprint for writing history books for centuries to come. One can argue that even for thousands of years to come. He is not as entertaining as Herodotus, but he is much more thorough, he is far less liberal with sources and evidence, and he is very analytical in his approach. If you go through the works of ancient historians, you can clearly see that they usually have a certain model and they utilize certain techniques. And this model is not Herodotus. You can read Polybius, you can read Livy, you can read Cassius Dio and clearly see the shadow of Thucydides looming over their works. Even if there's 6 centuries between Cassius Dio and Thucydides, they all try to emulate Thucydides in one way or another. And honestly, most of the time they fail to reach his level.